Hey everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm a guy called Joe, and this is Bootstrapping Tools Community Support, where we talk about the concepts and theories that help build strong, productive teams so that you, as an entrepreneur, can create a company, or you, as a leader in your company, can create a great team that can push your company forward as well as your career forward. Now, in today's topic, we're going to be talking about agile teams in the remote world, essentially what we're calling the distributed team model. And know that with COVID and the rise of remote, even though remote has been on the rise, but big explosion with remote work, and a lot of companies are now wondering, do we even need to get back into the office? That would be good for us to make a video, just talk a little bit about a distributed team, the advantages of them, the drawbacks of them, things that are a little bit debatable that people online are saying this is good, this is bad, or and then we were going back and forth on it. I figured we should create a video. Let's talk about it. And of course, if you do have any opinions on it, leave some comments in the section below. I definitely believe that there is no right or wrong answer to this. Mostly just perspectives and opinions, and experiments that you or other people can try at their company to see if they can make the best model that works and fits for their company. So diving into it, let's go over to our presentation. Agile teams in remote world distributed team model. I mentioned that, but essentially, let's talk about distributed agile teams. Let's talk about the advantages at first of it. So there are a couple of advantages that I want to highlight. There are many advantages overall, but I want to highlight a couple of these. The first one is that you are unrestricted to who you can hire. Now, back then, if you had an office in New York, you'd only be able to hire people in around the New York office area, even if there might be a really amazing, great team member that you might be able to hire in Austin. You can't do it because they would have to be remote, and if your company doesn't do a distributed team model or a remote model, then you can't hire them no matter how great they are, or if they want to even work for you. You have to ask them to relocate, but nowadays it's kind of hard to always relocate, to just uproot your entire family and then move over there. Isn't always as feasible as it might have been back then. Not that it was feasible back then, but either way, the point is, unrestricted talent pool makes it great for you and your company, you and your team, because then you don't have to worry about restrictions on location and ability for someone to move. The second thing I want to mention is potential reduction in expenses. So those expenses could be typical overhead expenses. If you're mostly a distributed agile team and you're a tech company running a SaaS product, majority of your team is probably going to be your engineers. Maybe it's not, but either way, you probably don't need an office. And if you do have a large team that still might want an office, you can have a smaller office that doesn't need to house your engineering team or any team that could be distributed out. So of course there are certain roles that you just can't be remote with. To name a couple, probably maybe some type of warehousing, if you're doing e-commerce or something like that. If you're doing marketing or creative and you need to be in person to do that, though, there are a lot of tools out there that let creative people do it online and remotely anyway nowadays. But either way, there is a potential for you to cut costs on office space or commuting benefits or snacks and stuff. I know a lot of tech companies like to provide snacks for their employees now, coffee expenses, any of that type of stuff you could view as a reduction in your overhead costs per year or per month. And now I have another one that I want to talk about, unlimited whiteboard space. I thought this was funny to add, but it's super valid. I remember when I used to go into the office all the time, we'd be in a meeting and be writing on the blackboard or the whiteboard. We always run out of space. I'd have to erase part of it, and then now it's no longer on the board, and we're no longer able to reference it as the conversation continues in that meeting. So if you're a distributed agile team, you're using technology, which you have unlimited digital whiteboard space. You just throw up a Jamboard from Google, or throw up the Zoom's whiteboarding, or throw up a document, throw up a Google Doc, just go crazy with it. You can do as much as you want. Of course, you can argue that you might be able to do that if you're in the office as well. But then what's the point of being in an office? You're just sitting around in a room staring at a laptop. You're still doing the same thing. So Point is, unlimited whiteboard space. It's always just funny. If you guys like planning, like I am, product managers, we tend to do that a lot. Whiteboarding, super great stuff. And I know a lot of engineers who also like whiteboarding too. So this is one of those points I wanted to make. Now, over to the drawbacks. There's a couple of main drawbacks that I wanted to point out. The number one was fewer physical social interactions. I know there, really depends on the person. Maybe you're more of an introvert, or you just don't like to interact with people, and you like put your headphones on and just like, don't talk to me unless I have to be in a meeting. Then this is probably great for you. But however, a lot of people do prefer that social interaction of being able to, talk to someone, just walk up to their desk and start a conversation and talk about a problem or a thought that they had, some brainstorming ideas. Not that you couldn't do it in a remote world, because you can always just call them up on Slack or send the Slack message and be like, hey, you got time to chat, and hop on a Slack call. There's lots of ways to do it. Slack just introduced the voice only rooms similar to Discord. So I tested it once. I loved it. It's a really good way to just quickly hop on and chat about something. It's really breaking down those walls that people said during the pandemic, that they lost that spontaneous spur of the moment conversations that you normally get in an office. But either way, no matter what, nothing really does replace that feeling of, say, you're starting to walk over to grab a coffee, you pass by someone's desk, they're there, and you're like, oh, hey, you reminded me of something I needed to chat with you about, and you just go ahead and have that conversation, as long as they're free. But of course, some people just hate being bothered. That's why you have the headphones on. That's more of a office culture thing. Just someone has their headphones on, don't bother them. But anyhow, the next thing I want to talk about is the potential complexities with taxes. I wanted to call this out because not only people think about this when they're talking about distributed agile teams. There's a lot of people out there who are very pro agile to remote work and all of that. They don't think about the potential tax implications for that company, because you essentially, well, it really depends. You have to look it up. Of course, I'm not a tax advisor, so don't take all this as like Bible or whatever law. But essentially, you do need to look into whether or not you have to file for a tax withholding account within that state if you have employees in a state that your company is not registered in. So just keep that in mind. If you guys are thinking about a distributed agile team, tax-wise, you're gonna have to probably file for that or do something so that you don't get bit in the butt later on when you're filing taxes at the end of the year. So just keep that in mind. But of course, there are companies out there that make this a little bit more easy, like JustWorks, for example. Part of their spiel is also being able to handle or give advice on all of that. Of course, you should hire a finance person, though, tax accountant or whatever. Make sure that they're the ones on top of this, because I'm not a tax advisor, so just keep that in mind. When it's something to think about. Now, I want to talk about some of the debatable things. These are a little controversial, so I think it'd be good to bring up. Number one thing, employee work-life balance. Some people say that work-life balance is much better when you're in a distributed team model for the employees, because they are at home, and if they need to do something, they can take care of that without too much worry about leaving the office and coming back. They're at home, so they can hop on to work, quickly hop off, handle something, hop back on. I know that in a lot of the office culture, the more kind of progressive tech companies, people do that too. If they need to go to the dentist, they'll hop out of the office and come back. But the work-life balance is kind of nice, in my opinion. It's just a matter of having to know where to draw the line, which brings us to the other side of the argument, where work-life balance is ruined because you're working from home, meaning because there's no physical boundary or barrier between your work life and your personal life, that you're constantly working all the time. I'd say that's likely true in a lot of cases. I find it hard for myself to pull away from the laptop and make sure that I'm spending time with my family. But of course, that's just discipline. You just need to make sure that at a certain time you gotta turn it off and only reply to emergencies. On the other side of the argument about this, though, you can say that because of Slack, we've all kind of entered a world where anybody is accessible at any given time through Slack. But of course, that's how it was back then with phones anyway. You can always just call someone and be like, hey, I need your help with this. But at least the difference there from back then and now is that you could just leave your laptop at the office and not bring it home with you, whereas now your laptop is probably at home and on your desk, and if you need to do something, you're probably going to open it up and do it. So all just comes down to discipline. That's why I have it here in the debatable section. It's really up to you. So it's not really a drawback and not really an advantage yet. It's all up to how you handle that. Next thing is time zone management. Some people say they love the fact that they have employees distributed across multiple time zones. It gives them a little bit more coverage. A lot of people also say that, hey, they hate it because now they have to have meetings at certain times. They have to cram all their meetings in the morning or cram all their meetings in the afternoon. If that team is off the clock, then you can't get anything done. Well, it's really up to how you handle it at your company. I've worked at companies that had teams in the Ukraine, in Spain, in Portugal, in all sorts of places. We had a team in Japan. I've also had teams that were across the Americas, and also only a team that was on the East Coast. I'd say that it's all literally the same experience. Really, at the end of the day, things get done because you plan accordingly to have that work get done. So neither an advantage or drawback, in my opinion. It's really just how you set up the culture at your company to make sure that if there are multiple people in different time zones, that you're handling that accordingly. So by involving them at certain times, you're just being committed to that. The next thing is reliance on written documentation. Definitely a pro and a con here, right? Because the disadvantage is that you have to spend the time to write the documentation. You can't maybe move as quickly. But of course, a lot of people are going to say you need the written documentation, because if you don't write it down, it's really hard for somebody else to jump in and then pick up where you left off. So when it comes to this, I'm leaning towards the advantage side, because it kind of forces documentation to be written, because you do have a distributed team, and if you're not always available at the same time, at the same work hours as the other team, you're gonna write things down so that they can always access that information while you're away. So I lean towards advantage, but of course I understand that there are drawbacks to it. It might just mean that you can't move as quickly as you might want to, or documentation often gets out of date really quickly. So there's just a little bit more operational procedures that you need to put in place to maintain this. So a bit of a drawback in that area, but in my opinion, it's more of an advantage than a drawback. But we'll leave it in this section to not ruffle any feathers. And then the third one is the forever Slack meeting. This one is pretty interesting, because I don't think it matters if you're in the office or out of the office, but a lot of people say like the distributed team means that you're relying a lot more on Slack. So that's a drawback, that you can't really get a lot of focus time in, because you're constantly on Slack. You're constantly trying to message or reply to everything that's going on. There's too many channels. Well, just like the first one with the employee work-life balance, discipline. You have to be disciplined. If you have focus time blocked off for yourself, don't look at Slack. Set the notifications to do not disturb. Don't look at anything. It's just like if you're in a meeting, right? You should be focused on that meeting. Don't be looking at Slack. I personally have looked at Slack a lot during a meeting, and then I missed something during the meeting. I had to ask people to repeat it. I'm sure that's happened to you, happened to a lot of people, but it's really about discipline, right? You just turn it off. Act like if you were going into a meeting in the office, no laptops, only maybe notebooks, and you're like focused, 100% attention, undivided for what's going on in that meeting, because meetings are expensive and you should pay attention there. And focus time is very important so that you don't lose steam and have to context switch. So in my opinion, neither a drawback or an advantage. It is a discipline oriented thing. So if you have good discipline, it'll be an advantage. If you don't, it'll be a drawback. And then one more thing is the split attention, which basically just mentioned. Just if you're in a meeting, right? If you're on a video conference, pay attention. Just don't look at your Slack, don't look at your email, don't be doing something else, don't be doing other work. And if you can apply the discipline there, then it'll be an advantage, being a distributed agile team. Otherwise, it will be a drawback if you're not paying attention, your team's not paying attention. So there's some tricks that you can do with that, and I'll cover that in another video, but just keep in mind, split attention and the forever Slack meeting. It's all about discipline, so that you can make the most out of the advantages of having a distributed team versus not being able to obtain those advantages because of the lack of attention, or the split attention when you're constantly staring at a screen, as opposed to just being in person, 100%, no laptops, no devices, and just you and the meeting attendees. Now, the one thing I want to talk about in this next section is just the key aspects for fostering a high-performing distributed team. Talked about a lot of things, the advantage and the drawbacks here, as well as the items that are debatable, and really depends on how you handle that situation. But there are 3 components that really matter when it comes to creating a productive distributed team that is, high performing and is happy and will help you excel your company and elevate it. And the first one is inclusion. You'll find that in a company that has a mix of distributed versus not, that the remote teams tend to get forgotten about. So you want to make sure that you're always including them. So keep it top of mind that the entire company is spread out. You are a distributed first company. So any type of communication, you can't just make an announcement in the office. You have to make an announcement on whatever platform is used for announcements for the entire company. If there's any type of events that are going on, it needs to be thought of as for everybody and not just people in the office. Of course, you'll have certain office things like events that might happen. Maybe one day you want to bring in donuts because it's National Donut Day or something like that. Make sure you think of how you can include your distributed teams as well. Maybe give them a $10 Dunkin' Donuts gift card or something like that for National Donut Day. Who knows? Whatever. Point is, make sure that you're thinking about all the teams as one, as opposed to office versus remote. Because when you do that, then you start to create segregation or separation, and that naturally forms cliques, which at any company you're going to get cliques. But this one is something that you should try to avoid as a company, as a company culture. You want to make sure that everybody feels like they're one team as opposed to separate teams, kind of with separate, cultures or ideas or core values. The next thing is ownership. You'll notice in a lot of distributed teams, and this is like some of the problems you'll hear people complain about, not really complain, but make comments about that, or give insight on as a problem or an issue that plagues distributed teams. The ownership aspect of it is that if you have an office or there are conversations happening in the office, that those conversations should not dictate the business decisions that affect the teams working on that project. Those teams should be included. So if you do have an office and then a distributed team, make sure that you are including them in those conversations. Just zoom them in. Sure, you have AV set up. Just get them in there. If you don't have AV set up, bring a laptop. Just put them on the screen so they can weigh in on whatever conversation is going on. Now, if you don't have a separate office, that's even more important that as you're having conversations, don't make it like a direct message with some one on your team and you're like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we're going to go with that. Let's go with that. And then not announce it. So if you are in a situation where the entire team is distributed, it's very important to always put everything into public Slack channels or into a wide distribution network like email. Perhaps not everybody reads email, of course, nowadays, but just make sure you put it in a open forum where anybody can see that, or the right people at least can see it if there is a reason you shouldn't have wide transparency around that topic. So that way the people who are involved in the project can weigh in and have ownership over what's going on in their projects. You don't want someone to have a DM and say that's going to happen, especially if you're like part of leadership for your team or your company. You want to make a decision with one member of the team and then expect that it's going to happen. You shouldn't even be making that type of decision. You should be giving them the problem or the goal that you're trying to achieve, and then have them figure out what the approach is, unless their approach is completely wrong, in which case that's another topic that we'll discuss, how to be an effective leader without being a dictator. So that's another conversation we'll have. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is commitment, and you have to be committed to the idea that you have a distributed team. If you have a distributed team, you have to make sure everything you do is around the benefit of, well, not the benefit, but the idea that everything has to be digitalized. Can't make announcements about things. Can't have one-on-one conversations, side chats with someone. You have to make sure it's out in the public so that the correct people can weigh in on that. You have to make sure that if there is a decision that's going to happen, that you leave it to the people you've put in charge of that particular project. You have to make sure that if there are events, if there are any HR benefits or anything like that, that you are thinking about the team as a whole, rather than as, office versus not, or even just like certain people versus not, or certain cities versus not. If you do an office party, find a way to include everybody in that. If you can't bring everybody together, because I know that can be expensive, try to find a way where you say have a virtual one or something like that, and send everybody a special, I don't know, gift or something for the holidays, so that they can play a part in that, or contribute, or just be involved. But you have to be committed. If you're gonna have a distributed team, it's not half in, half out. It's not, we're gonna test it a little bit. It's, you have to go all in. Otherwise, you're not going to have the right culture. You're not gonna have the right backing or support. You're not gonna rally up your company around it. And then as a result, it's going to fail, or it's not gonna be great or the best that it can be. So in order to have the highest performing distributed team, you need to commit to it. You need to make sure that your distributed team, whoever you put in charge of the projects on those distributed teams, have full ownership of what's going on in those projects, that you're not making side decisions without them, and that you must include them in any conversation or happenings that are going on in the company as well, so that you feel that it is one big team, one company, as opposed to separate teams in the same company. So I know that was a long rant, but that's basically it. So agile teams in the remote world, to distributed team model. I hope that was helpful. Of course, if these are my opinions, and also I'm not a tax advisor, I just have to say that again. But if you do have views on this, feel free to leave a comment in the section below. I'm always happy to chat about this. I don't know if we'll be debating. It's more like just sharing ideas. So if you have ideas on this or perspectives on it, leave a comment. Let's start a conversation about this. I think it's really helpful, especially nowadays, as we're coming out of this new world of like more remote than it was before the pandemic. Things are a little different, and a lot of companies are realizing that they don't necessarily need to have an office space. And a lot of individual contributors out there who have moved out to the suburbs or moved out to places have realized that the standard of living is just so much better. And I'd say it's unlikely people would want to move back to the major metropolitan areas just so that they can have a job at a company that is viewed as like really successful. Because let's face it, we're in a new era, a new modern era, where internet connection is very fast in parts of the world that it wasn't like before. So remote work and distributed teams is just going to become more and more of a thing. And it's important that as we drive towards, or we head towards this direction, that we as leaders, or just you as leaders, I guess we as leaders, because myself, are doing or making the right choices, or thinking about how we can make the right choices to ensure we have strong teams. But of course, if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button. It's the best way to support this channel, and make sure that other scrappy bootstrappers and entrepreneurs just like you can find this video along with our many other videos on YouTube. Make sure to check those out and learn from it just like you did. We'll have a lot of different videos coming out around these concepts and theories. So if you do like this format and like the information, make sure to hit that subscribe button and also the bell, so that you get notified when we release the next video. And of course, I'm a guy called Joe. This is Bootstrapping Tools Community Counsel, where we talk about all the concepts and theories to help you grow your business. It's been a pleasure, and we're out.